A very warm welcome to This World Game Changers podcast, where your host, Paul D. Lowe, embraces many crucial conversations that compassionately contribute towards creating a better life and world. Paul's intention is very simple: to help get people's inspirational insights and motivational messages out into the world so others may benefit.
Hello listeners, and welcome to this World Game Changers podcast again. And it is my immense pleasure to introduce a first-timer, if there's such a phrase, a first-timer, close personal friend, business associate of 20 years or more, Mick Garton. Mick, a very, very warm welcome to you.
Hello, Paul. Good to see you, mate.
And under this Angels with Dirty Faces, conversations about the game of life, Mick's going to be talking to me and Gary about two massively but different influences in our life. Well, one of them was certainly different, and that was the music. So Mick's going to be the proverbial question master and talk to us about memorable matches of music. So I suppose an obvious one to lead you in on, Mick, is, you know, there's three guys on this podcast and we're all diehard Nottingham Forest boys. So, I don't know, memorable matches. Where do you want to take it?
Well, when I first went to Forest, it was in the early 70s. I think my dad, from a personal point of view, my dad gave me the choice as a kid of going to Notts County or Forest. He actually took me to both, so I could sort of make my mind up and pick which team I went to. But obviously the experience at Forest, even then, I think my first game was when I was about 8. I think it was possibly 71, and I saw Forest. I think they lost 1-0 to Manchester United, but Ian Storey-Moore was playing. From a personal point of view, my first real big memory of Forest was the Duncan McKenzie game in 1974, which I believe was the first Sunday game. And it was at the City Ground with Man City, and we beat them in the cup. And that's my first memory. What about you guys going back? What was your first real big memory of your first really memorable game that sticks in the head, guys? Both of you.
Well, if I could just speak to that one, they called that the Mackenzie final, didn't they, when they won 4-1? That was quite a scalp for Forest at the time. Quite a scalp. I think previously in the third round they'd played Bristol Rovers, which was 4-3. They'd played Portsmouth in the next round, which was 1-0. And then they played, as you say, Manchester City on the Sunday, 4-1. And then the infamous game then, which was Newcastle United. Any thoughts, Gary? Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I can vaguely remember it. We went up to Newcastle. I think Forest took 12,000 supporters. We were winning 3-1, weren't we? Newcastle invaded the pitch, trying to get it called off. It was total mayhem at the time. And then the ref restarted it. I think Newcastle come back to 3-3. I think there's several pitch invasions. And Newcastle actually won the tie in the end, I think 4-3. But the FA decided it wasn't fair. Really, Forest should have been awarded the tie, to be honest with you. But they decided to replay it, and they replayed it at Goodison Park. First, had 2 replays at Goodison Park, 0-0, and then eventually Forest got beat 1-0 at Goodison Park. Bear in mind, that's flipping miles for Forest fans to travel again. There's ordering a replay. It should have been replayed at Forest or something. And then Newcastle went on to win they went on to the final. They lost to Liverpool. Yeah. That was one of my first memories. I remember the cup final before. I think Leeds lost to they beat Sunderland. No, they lost to Sunderland the year before. And then Newcastle lost to Liverpool 3-0 because they called it the Malcolm McDonald final against Kevin Keegan.
Can I just ask you a question on that? This is an interesting point. I can't remember who told me this, but was not the Newcastle chairman something to do with the top man at the FA? Because I think the general opinion was, remembering it as a kid, that the actual game Newcastle got away with. Newcastle got away with.
They were robbery, really.
Yeah. Can you remember that, Paul?
No. Do you know what? I mean, how old was I at the time? I was 13 and a half. 13 and a half.
And I think he was a Newcastle chairman. He was also very high up at the FA. And there was a feeling at the time that the maybe because of his power, things got influenced, and the punishment wasn't nearly as bad as it could possibly have been. But I was a kid. I've got memories of it, and I remember how everybody in Nottingham thought we'd been cheated. Definitely.
Yeah, even to this day, the older Forest lads go on and on and on. They're dead bitter to this day. I mean, I've become friends with Newcastle lads over the years. I've been to a few Newcastle games over the years. I'm really good friends with all the Geordies. But a lot of our older lot are still bitter, and they're still to this day don't forgive them. You know what I mean?
It's
Two
amazing.
memorable games there: the Man City game and the Newcastle game for different reasons. What about you, Paul? What's other than those two games? What else sticks in your memory from that from the early era? Perhaps when Clough, before Clough, or was it when Cloughie came that your first real memories come into being?
No, it was pre-Clough, but I mean, obviously there was something magical about that. There was something magical. Cloughie come in January '75, didn't he? Alan Brown had got the sack after losing to Notts County over the Christmas. I think it was 2-0. Something, if memory serves. Alan Brown got the sack. Cloughie came in, and the rest is history. So memorable games. I don't know, Mick, because I just loved it in those days. You know, I can remember them. They went through a spell of losing 2-1. They lost 3 home games on the trot, 2-1, and one of them was against Bolton Wanderers. And I can remember John McGovern kicking up near the East Stand, as it was there. I think it's called. I'm still talking old money.
It's a Brian Clough stand there. It was the old East Stand, then it went to the executive stand with the new stand, and then it's been renamed Brian Clough stand.
Well, I was always an East Stand boy. I was never a Trent End boy. I was always an East.
That's where all the aggro used to be, Paul. No wonder.
Yeah, I was easily led in them days, Gary. Easily led.
Yeah.
But I can remember John McGovern kicking this divot, kicking the ground, and this divot of grass comes up. And they had a competition at the end of the game, like the schools final. They used to call it the Forest Bowl, where it's like a local cup final for the schools. And straight afterwards, I went on the pitch and I'd got my eye on this divot. I thought, I'm having that. And I went on the pitch and I picked this piece of grass up, I don't know, maybe 6 inches by 3 inches. And I took it home. And my grandma had got a Pyrex dish because I live with my grandma. And I put this Arlode Forest turf in this Pyrex dish. My grandma was into home cooking and pies and all that, a lot of that. And I hid it because and she went by me. She used to say, Paul, where's my Pyrex dish? And I said, I don't know. It's gone. And I hid it under the pantry. And I used to water it every day because it was pride of place, because it was forest turf. So that Bolton game sticks in my mind. Peterborough in latter years, but let's stick to the early years. I think it'd have to be that Bolton game, Mick, just for that memory.
And what about the fashion of the music at that time? I mean, apart from the trendy music, we laugh about it now, but can you remember when Forest used to come out to Robin Hood?
Robin Hood. Yeah, I can remember Robin Hood.
That was the thing for years. I mean, now it's more dancey and more punchy, and they have quite a build up to the kickoff nowadays. But I do remember that being a kid, and the music at the time, I remember the 70s. I don't know what you guys can remember from that time when I was a kid. I remember
Bay City Rollers around that area.
Well, I remember ABBA, and I remember Bee Gees, and then going into the 80s.
Yeah, well, you got into the disco music, didn't you?
What was the kind of music you guys were into? You know,
I was a kid then, so I wasn't really into my music. To be honest with you, I was just a kid. I was just into football.
Was you more into the clothing, the designer clothing, and that sort of thing?
Not really, because I was still at primary school. When you're talking early 70s, I didn't start senior school till 76.
So this came later.
Yeah, it came later. The casual scene come sort of towards late 70s, 79, 80, when I was just leaving school. You know, I started wearing my fashion stakes went up then. You know what I mean? But when I was at primary school, up to 76, all I bothered about was football. I couldn't give a two hoots about bloody clothes, really, at the time. You know what I mean? It was when I started the big school, I started noticing fashion. You know what I mean? 76 onwards. Really. Everyone was wearing flares and denim scarves around the wrists at the time, weren't they? And everyone at football matches, everyone was fair game for a flipping a fight, really, in them days. At that time, it didn't matter what colours you had on. You had to hide your colours at away games most of the time.
Yeah.
You know, it was frightening. You know, you went to these away matches and you hadn't show your colours. You know what I mean? You ended up getting a kick up the arse. You know what I mean?
I can remember the velvet jacket. What about you, Paul? What about you, designer clothing, music? What's your thoughts?
Well, certainly music, and I mean, I don't bandy this around too much because it's like obviously coming from the background that that I come from as a guy, you didn't admit to this, but I was massively into David Cassidy.
Yeah,
I love David Cassidy, and I still do. I love his, yeah. And I think because of what I was going through in my own childhood, I was looking for some kind of emotional reassurance because my world was chaotic. It was violent. And I love the gentleness of it. I found it very soothing, and I still do to this day. And like
the punk scene came around that time, didn't it? Sid Vicious and all that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I can remember kids at school becoming punk rockers and stuff. Sorry, Paul, interrupted you.
Yeah, funny enough you say that, Gary, because I was down in the tube station at midnight, literally 2 days ago in London, and I was thinking about you because I knew that one of your favourite kind of genres of music is the jam.
The jam, I love it.
And when it's funny how it triggers our mind, but triggers our mind. Whenever I go in the tube station, for some reason I always think of you because of your love of the jam and that iconic record. So to answer your question, Mick, in terms of the music, David Cassidy was massive at the time, and I've really got to be sort of, I don't put this out in latter years, but Gary Glitter, I was massively into Gary Glitter.
I was obviously at the time we didn't know the other side to the gentleman, did we?
Well, we don't really want to be in his gang anymore, do we?
We've got his own gang now.
Just taking on the conversation from that, we obviously move on to the Cloughie era. Obviously, the era that era I mentioned, Gary, to a certain extent, was still at school, but going then obviously onto the great Cloughie years, getting promotion, the European Cups. That was from the late 70s into the early 80s. From a personal point of view, I think of I love the 80s music. I still quite often listen to the 80s radio stations.
That's my favourite, the 80s.
Human League.
Human League were my favourite.
Tainted Love.
Yeah,
was a big song.
Yeah. That was when I just first left school, you know what I mean, or just leaving school. And that sort of music still my favourite now, really.
What would your most memorable games be that you attended, apart from the hooligan element and the fighting? What about were the games during that time that you did actually get to enjoy the football?
I mean, leaving school, and I was still at school, and Forest winning the old First Division Championship. Liverpool at home, 47,000. As it happened, I managed to cop a season ticket that year. I was still at school. One of my dad's best friends at the time got in a bit of an altercation at the Old Town Arms, and he's never been a fighter, but ended up going 6 months in prison. He had a season ticket for the main stand, one of the best seats in the house.
Yeah.
And he gave it to me, my dad to give to me. So I ended up watching half that season. I was winning the league, and I was in the main stand, a comfortable seat, watching Forest Patrol with Liverpool at Christmas, 1-1. Everyone was 47,500. Everyone was round the pitch, sat round pitch side. And at Everton a few days later, 44,000.
Out of the 2 European Cups and the 3 League Cup finals that we got to.
Yeah, I went to every one.
That was my next question.
I went to every League Cup final. I went first time.
Did you manage to get to see all the games? Or did
I went to all of them.
Altercations.
No, I was still at school. I wasn't in that sort of thing.
It came later.
Came later when I left school. Yeah. Well, my dad took me to all those cup finals, going down Wembley way. Forest Liverpool 0-0 at Wembley, and I went to the replay at Old Trafford. That was a bit odd. When Mum went, it was a bit dicey that night. Liverpool fans didn't like losing. That was great. Old Trafford that night game when we won that League Cup for the first time. That was one of my great memories. Yeah, John O'Weir outside the box, John Robinson penalty.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Well, it was inside the box. John always told us it was inside the box.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you, Paul? That particular spell. We're just moving on to the sort of late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah, I did the 2 European finals, but what was interesting for me, as Forest started becoming more successful, I kind of lost my interest a bit. I loved it in the earlier days when they were the underdog. I had this siege mentality because of my upbringing. I always fought for the underdog. It was part of my belief. And because Forest in the kind of, I know they got promoted in it was 76, 77 season, wasn't it? When Kenny Ibbott scored for Wolves.
That's right, for Wolves at Bolton, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah, 1-0. And Cloughie sent him a crate of champagne.
Right.
Yeah, Cloughie sent him a crate of champagne.
Right. Out of the airplane, didn't it?
Once they started getting successful, it's like, I know this might sound daft, but it's like, I've done my bit now. I've stuck through them through thick and they don't need me anymore. I mean, they didn't need me anyway. But this is the power of beliefs that we have, isn't it? This mindset, this story we create in our own minds about the way things are. Just going back to my suicide attempt in my first suicide attempt as a kid of 13 and a half. It was on the back of that Newcastle game, that second replay, losing 1-0 at Goodison, and Malcolm MacDonald scored. That was on the Thursday night. 2 days later, they played at Craven Cottage and lost 2-0 to Fulham. That was it. My world was shattered. I couldn't cope anymore. And I've spoke to Frank Clarke about this in latter years. I said, you know what? It was those 2 games that basically broke my heart. And I think the point of sharing this is to understand the power of a belief system that we get in our minds. Because for me, Forest were my world. And I can remember at the time being physically sick on that Saturday tea time, physically sick because I used to get sent to bed early and because I was subjected to violence, and I'd spend most of my time, and my mum would calm me down and sneak me bars of chocolates and try and, and she'd sneak the score to me and she'd write things down, Ian Bowyer scored, or, this happened or whatever. And my mum was like me, my messenger, if you like. And when she said they've got beat 2-0, I could see her crying because she knew what it meant to me. So, yeah, it's a really, probably not the answer she was looking for, Mick, or expecting, but that's the reality of my world. So when Gary talks about, football and the influence of violence, I can talk about it, but in a completely different way, if that all makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can remember, obviously, still at school and that, and if I wasn't allowed to go or have to be in bed for a certain time, I used to sneak the transistor radio to bed with me and keep it under my pillow and listen to the games. And then I can remember my dad coming in, you could hear him come upstairs. So I switched the radio off quick, put it back under the pillow, and I'd make out I was asleep, you know what I mean? Right.
So what about moving into the 80s then? We got into into the 80s. Forest had we had a situation where, we talk about memorable games, Paul. I don't know if you can remember the game. I was in bed listening to it on the transistor as we talked about it. The game where Forest got cheated out of the game against Anderlecht, and then later came Anderlecht and paid the referee off. And Cloughie might have even had another trophy on his. Well, he might have had another one with the FA Cup with the Gascoigne incident if Roger Milford had made the right decision. But certainly the Anderlecht one was a case of fraud and corruption. And what's your memories of that? Can you remember that as well, Gary?
Yeah, I was there both games.
Yeah,
I went Saturday night straight. We played Birmingham at home on Saturday. We won 2-0 at Forest. I think Steve Osmark got both goals. And then we played Birmingham at home on the Saturday. The second leg was in Brussels, and we decided to get the ferry. We drove down with Mark, who I worked for now.
Yeah.
We left it. I think he had a Capri at the time. We met some other lads down at, I think it was Folkestone. It might have been Dover. And we got the boat over to Ostend. So we left straight from Forest Birmingham Saturday tea time, about 5 o'clock, straight down to Dover, and got the ferry, overnight ferry, about 8 o'clock or something silly. Manchester United were going Juventus, and I think that was we was in the cup. That was in the Cupman's Cup. We was in the UEFA Cup, and the ferry was full of United fans going to Juventus. And they was obviously making their way over to Italy, and we was going to Brussels. And there was a massive fight on the ferry. We Forest and Man United on the ferry Saturday night. We ended up getting frog marched off the ferry and arrested and locked up in Ostend. So,
did you get to the game there?
Yeah, we managed to get to the game. Yeah, I took a bit of a kicking actually, and I was battered and bruised. And we woke up next day, got let out, and we managed to get to Brussels. And they were all mayhem over there. Anderlecht was all in. There was a tiny section of Forest. I think it's 4,000 there, shoved in this tiny section to the side of the goal, and it could have been another Hillsborough.
Yeah,
and we had to climb over the fences. Everyone was getting squashed, and we climbed over the fences, ended up in the Anderlecht end behind the goal. And you could see, sense something went right. There was a dodgy penalty. There was trouble behind the goal the whole game, and Paul Hart got a last minute. Was 3-0 down.
Perfectly good header.
Perfectly good header. That got disallowed. You knew something was wrong at the time. That goal would have gone in. Would have gone through on away goals.
Right.
They'd been 3-3 and would have gone through on away goals, but we got robbed. You knew something wasn't right at the time. It took a few years to come out, didn't it?
Can you remember that, Paul?
I can remember it, and I spoke with Paul Hart, as you know, when I was in the academy at Forest. Artie was originally the academy director before he got the gaffer's job, and and a special shout out really to Paul Hart, because in my humble opinion, he's an amazing man, the highest integrity, and you could only try and get a sense of how aggrieved doesn't even scratch the surface. Getting to know Paul personally and his morals and his very, very high standards, and particularly his views against cheating. And that personal element, as you say, Gary, in banging that header in and it scrubbed out, and I think, I can't remember, correct me I think Paul actually took a private suing or a summons out on the ref, but didn't the ref die before everything came to a head?
I think he was a Spanish referee. He got killed in a car crash in Spain.
Mysteriously drove off a cliff.
Yeah, in Spain.
Right.
Just as it was.
But we've had Paul Hart recently down at Carlton Town, and we spoke about this game. But I bumped into him recently at the cricket. I think it was the Test match in the summer, and he was in a box next to our box at Trent Bridge. And me and Mark, my MD, we had about half an hour chatting to Paul about the Anderlecht game.
Yeah.
Anderlecht game, and he's still, obviously still grieving over it, really. You know what I mean? Yeah. Which is right.
And what's interesting, what you've just said there, Gary, we had Paul Hart down at Carlton Town. That was 2 years ago this Christmas.
Yeah, I think that's when I first met you, Paul.
Yeah, that was first met because I did Q&A with Paul.
Yeah, you did the comparing, didn't you? I remember, yeah. That's when I first ever met you, wasn't it?
Yeah.
What about the we mentioned that particular game against Anderlecht, where again we as we're moving into the 80s, is there anything that sticks in? We spoke to Gary about clothing lines and various things. Did you ever get into fashion or anything like that, Paul, or was it something that you took an interest in?
I didn't have kind of, the latest designer tracksuit because, I don't know, ADIDAS was the thing to have. I was always, if everybody had ADIDAS, I'll have something different, because I was never, ever part of a crowd. I've always been a loner, being labelled miserable, antisocial. Even when I used to get in scrapes, I always kind of operated solo. It was, it's an interesting one. So with the gear, I can remember having some moccasin shoes, proper leather moccasin shoes out my grandma's catalogue. I mean, I'm going back a good few years, young man, 21, 22. And there was something like 40 quid at the time, which in them days was a lot of money. But they were like pride of place. So, I used to have decent gear, but I was very, very traditional, very traditional. So, whatever I had, I kind of liked to have the best of everything. But it was kind of very old-fashioned, not old-fashioned, but traditional. And that, in many respects, reflected my taste in music as well. So, I love the Jam, particularly that Down in the Tube Station at midnight. Because I was thinking the other night when I was down there, I thought, well, we'll be doing this podcast. Maybe me, Mick and Gary, we can do a couple of lines from that for our listeners. It's just
I think a music taste as you get older. I mean, like I mentioned early on, that my first memories were the Bee Gees and ABBA, but by the mid-80s there was Frankie Goes to Hollywood. We mentioned one or two of the 80s bands earlier on. Your interests do change as you get as you get older.
I agree with Mick though. I love the 80s. Still to this day, I love the 80s music. And obviously Mick does a bit of DJing, and that's his favourite music when he plays.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm
looking forward to going to the Dragon, which he's had
first time.
Yeah, first time. He's had a couple of years. I've always been preoccupied or had something else on the cards. But we're going to do one for Carlton Town fundraiser in the new year, so we'll all make sure we have a big turnout for that.
Nice.
Moving on, we've talked about the 80s, the Cloughie era, the late 80s. I just want to touch on the late 80s because after, I think Forest may have had further success in Europe, but unfortunately, because of what happened with ISIL.
So we missed out. I think we qualified for Europe every season.
Yeah, we missed out, and Cloughie may well have gone on to win more trophies. But I just wanted to touch on the team that Cloughie built in the late 80s, early 90s, the likes of Des Walker, Steve Checkle, Nigel Jemson, Nigel Clough, Neil Webb, Steve Stoney and Wone Stewart Pearce. Then going into the early 90s with Roy Keane. What's your memories? You go first, Gaz. What's your memories of that particular? What was your
like you said? We had the barren years, didn't we? After the great side broke up, Peter Taylor left and he went to Derby, and then Forest struggled for a bit. Cloughie struggled for a bit, didn't he? We had a few barren years, and then they built that second great team, like Mick says. Probably mid-80s, didn't we?
Mid to late 80s.
Mid to late 80s. Yeah. We didn't win anything, but
we won a couple of league cups, I think, at the back end of the 80s.
Yeah, we struggled a bit. We was just getting a good side together about 85. I think 86, we played Arsenal in the League Cup, lost 2-0 in the quarter-final. So I was knocking on the door. We was just starting to build that great side. And I think it was at 1989, we the first time we won anything for probably 9 years, I think. Beat Luton at Wembley. We got to Wembley. Probably pretty similar to last year.
Were you there?
Yeah, I was there. I was at all them as well. But we got to. I can remember we were knocking on the door, weren't we? We finished third in the league in '88, I think, and '89. We got to a semi-final of the FA Cup 2 years on the trot. I think it was '88, '89, and we eventually won the League Cup in '89. So it was a bit like last season. We were starved for so many years, and we haven't been to Wembley for so many years, like the playoff final for 23 years, and that was the first time we've been to Wembley for 9 years, I think. 9 years when we beat Luton. So it's a pretty similar situation to last season. You know what I mean? It was that 9 year, and everyone was so elated. It felt, you know what I mean? We won something again.
Yeah, Cloughie done it again.
You know, then went on a roller coaster ride where we was winning everything again. It was final after final after final again. And you know, if you include the Simod Cup finals, the FA Cup final, which we won the Simod Cup finals, we lost the FA Cup final. We won 2 League Cups on the belt, 89 and 1980. Couple of Simods. Yeah. 91, I think we got to the FA Cup final. 92, we lost the League Cup final to Manchester United. And that was the second great team we built. Then we got relegated in his last season. Yeah. Then Frank Clarke took over, and we had a bit of success under Frank Clarke. Got to the quarter-final UEFA Cup, third in the league when we come straight back up. Yeah. Finished third in the league, which was fantastic. Unheard of these days. You know what I mean? For a team to come out of the old First Division to finish third in the Premier League, and actually try us like Man United away, you know what I mean, and win everywhere. And you know, we was a great side again, wasn't we?
I think a lot of that, we did have a good side, but I think a lot of that was down to one man called Stan Collymore.
Stan Collymore,
he was at the heart of all that.
Yeah, Stan. I think Stan would say another season would have won that UEFA Cup as well. Because basically we had Brian Roy up front on his own, and Stan left for Liverpool.
Yeah, so Brian's game suffered, didn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. If Stan would have said one more year, I'm sure we'd have won that UEFA Cup.
Yeah, agree.
You know what I mean? And then obviously, we went down again. You know, when Stan left and Frank struggled a little bit after that, didn't he? And then we went down again. Then we came up again. And I think Dave Bassett. You know, and then we were like a yo-yo club. Then we kept going up, down, down. And then obviously, we went down again. And it's 23 years since we took to come back to this year. You know what I mean?
From your point of view, Paul, you mentioned that when we started to have the success, and I know you personally, obviously for a number of years, so I relate to what you say about being the hero of the underdog, because you've always been like that as a person in the time I've known you, without a shadow of doubt. But you mentioned that when Forest were having the success, you sort of you thought you'd done your bit, and you know, you pulled away a little bit. How were you? Where were you coming from then in the sort of mid-80s when we were struggling a bit, and then when Cloughie built the new side, as Gaz said, in the mid to late 80s, early 90s, when we were really doing well again? Where were you at with Forest at that time?
Oh, completely out of it, Mick, because by then my head was well and truly screwed. You know, from my childhood, and you know, my drinking had got out of control. I'd lost my marriage. You know, my head has gone, and I'd, you know, the guy that was responsible for that, I wrote about it in my book called Emerging from the Forest. Basically, I vowed that one day I'd return and I'd kill him for all the misery he'd inflicted on me and my mother, more so my mother. And that's when that really started kicking off in the mid to late 80s, and things. That was a really bad time for me. I can remember I was hitting the bottle hard. You know, I just give up, and I just wanted to die. I'd lost all self-respect. I'd got, you know, I just lost everything, and so the football thing, it was just not on the radar. Just not on the radar. I was too busy. You know, I was sleeping on park benches. Somebody said to me once, "You've got a lovely polished voice," and I said, "Yeah, because that's when I used to drink Brasso." I used, went for a fix. I used to have Brasso, the metal polisher with some milk in it. Because you talk about hit, I mean, it's almost pure alcohol. It used to knock your head off, but it gave you a hit.
I was going to say as you do, but I've never known anybody else who drinks that, Paul. So.
Oh, it's an acquired taste, mate. It's an acquired taste.
That's good, that one. Yeah.
Well, like I say, Gary, it gives you a nice, clean voice.
When did you pull from there? Where did you start taking it? You say you'd lost interest in the football side of things because of the problems in your life. When did you actually start realistically to start following Forest again? When did you start? I know you've obviously lived abroad for the last few years, but when did it sort of come back on your radar, if you like?
I went to the '89 final v Luton when we beat them 3-1 in the Little. Was it the Little? I still call it the League Cup. Yeah. I went to that game, and that started to, I was starting to straighten myself out a bit by then. That was kind of I went on the coach with the Bestwood lot, and that was a colourful day, a very colourful day. That was probably the start of it.
Yeah. Okay, we'll move into the 90s then. We talked about, we mentioned the 90s. I mean, coming back to I wasn't a massive fan of the music in the 90s, Gaz. What about yourself?
Yeah, I did. I like Oasis. It's one of my favourite bands.
Yeah.
Favourite bands to this day, really. I thought the Britpop scene came in, didn't it? I did like the Britpop scene. Oasis, Pulp. I liked all them sort of bands. The Verb. I liked all them sort of bands. Even to this day, I still like listening to their music. I thought the mid '90s were a good music scene.
Yeah, fair enough. What about yourself, Paul? Had you moved on from David Cassidy by this time, or
no? I mean, Frank Sinatra was massive.
I love Frank Sinatra.
And what's been apparent for all my life. I mean, I lived in the past because. And the psychology behind that was because my childhood was so violent and so erratic that I was looking for some kind of emotional security. And I found that in trips down memory lane. So, clinging to things like Sinatra, Karen Carpenter. I love Karen Carpenter.
Yeah, I like Karen Carpenter. I like Carpenter.
And even Forest, my love for Forest, I couldn't shift myself from music and football of the 70s. I used to talk about players I still do it now. I bumped into one of the old school referees and befriended, we've become good friends. But I talk about Franny Lee, Dennis Stewart, Roy McFarlane's, Dave Mackay, the old school, if you will. And I'm still, to a certain degree, I won't say stuck in the past, but appreciative of that culture of when people stood for real values.
Well, the football. Great in them days, weren't they? You had the great Man City had a good side. Chelsea had a great side in the early 70s. Alan Hudson, and the players were fantastic, weren't they? You know what I mean? The football was great. The muddy pitches.
I was thinking of that.
I remember Tony Curry, Sheffield United had a great side. Alan Woodward, a great Leeds team as well. Chelsea had a great side. Some great games, weren't they? Arsenal had a good side.
Magical.
Charlie George. What players in them days?
And the skillful players weren't protected by referees.
That's right. Because you had the athlete men like Tommy Smith, Norman Hunter. You know what I mean?
Yeah, Chopper
Harris.
And I mean, to be fair, Kenny Burns and Larry Lloyd.
Yeah, Kenny Burns. No, they didn't. No,
if we're honest.
No.
It's fascinating just looking at it. It seems to a certain extent, just listening to the two of you, certainly in terms of the music scene and that, you sort of moved on with the years, where Paul just openly admitted there he's still hopping back a little bit. Yeah. Be interested to get your thoughts moving into the after the Dave Bassett era, we went up, and then the last 23 years.
Yeah.
Right. Just so we've got to the end of the decade almost. We had that little bit of success under Dave Bassett. My memories of that, and I'll be interested to get the take of both of you on this. My memory of that is that we had a good side under Bassett, played some good football. I enjoyed that particular season when he took us up. But the difference between this year, where probably the chairman has been, or the owner's been criticised for perhaps spending too much money, those owners at the time had no intention of spending any money, and they actually took us up. And I think we lost 2 of our best players, Campbell and Cooper. Van Hooydonk subsequently went on strike, and it was just an accident waiting to happen. We were dead man walking in that league, and I can't attach any blame really to the manager.
Scholar?
Scholar. They took the. I think they took the money. Yeah. They went up. They took the money, and it was horrible. So great season getting us up there, but from my memory, we had the wrong owners at the time, and they had no way of moving the club forward, and they probably had ulterior motives.
I can remember the David Platt as well, when he brought the 3 Italians in, didn't he?
What's your memories, Paul? First of all, of the Paul Hart era, and sorry, not the Paul Hart era. Apologies, the Dave Bassett era, and what happened following the promotion.
Yeah, I mean, there again, Mick, it's a really good question, that is, because from a head point of view, from a memory point of view, there's not much there. But from a heart point of view, I wrote it. The first book I ever wrote was called Mastering the Game of Life. I self-published it, and I wrote a line in there to say, I've been married once, I've had 3 engagements, I don't know how many girlfriends, but I've only ever had 1 football team.
Yeah.
And despite not kind of going into depth about things around the 90s, as I said, I've gone missing through my love affair, through my marriage to Forest. I've gone missing, but we've never ever split. Never split. And I find that remarkable. And I've had so many conversations with pros over the years involved, in football, around that iconic Shankly statement about, football's not about life or death. It's far more important. And that was tongue-in-cheek from that canny old Scotsman. But do you know what? I think certainly there's 3 guys on this podcast that could probably relate to that.
Yeah, you definitely agree, mate. I must admit, I'm a bit of a tart when it comes to football. I've got about 10 teams.
I tell you what, Gary, it's the first time I've heard you say, I thought I knew a lot about you. That's a new one. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I get a lot of stick for that. I reckon I got more clubs than Jack Nicklaus.
I mean, the last after that, obviously the Paul Hart era, Gary. Yeah. When did you start going to football just to watch the football, and the hooligan element went out of it for you? When did your focus change?
What, for getting out of the hooligan element?
Yeah,
I got out the hooligan element in 2004. Obviously, I was still on a banning order till 2010. So
you weren't able to go to a game?
Not really, but I did get my football fixed. I started going to Newcastle matches, Rangers. I started going to watch Newport County in Wales. So I got mates all around the world.
So these are part of the town,
I started going to FC Cologne abroad. So I still got my football fix, you know what I mean? Because of my involvement around the world in football, following England all the years, I picked a lot of friends up along the way in different countries, different clubs. And obviously, I wasn't allowed to watch Nottingham Forest for 9 years. I started going to different teams, you know what I mean? And I still had my days out. I wasn't involved in any trouble at that time. That was me turning my life around, you know what I mean? But I still loved my football day, you know what I mean? So I used to go to different towns, different clubs, so that's perhaps where I get the nickname, Jack Nicklaus, you know what I mean? So.
And on Forest, just at that point, were you still following from a distance?
I'm Forest part. I'm Forest mental. You know what I mean? I was always following Forest from afar. Obviously, I wasn't allowed to go and watch him. So, but I'll be honest with you, I didn't miss too much because we went down to League 3.
Yeah, that's right.
And we had 3 years down there. The only thing I regret, I missed all the rubbish really, but I like my grounds. I'm a bit of a ground hopper as well. And at the time of getting that banning order in 2001, I think I was up to like nearly 70 league grounds.
Wow.
And then we went down to the old 3rd division. And I would have clocked, so I'd have probably done all 92 by now.
Yeah.
Watching Forest. So I missed out on going to different venues, really. That was a big regret, you know what I mean? Yeah, missing Forest playing at Chester away. And I've seen Forest play at Chester before in the League Cup. But, Forest going to more, wherever they played, you know what I mean? Them little clubs, Yeovil. I missed all them games, you know what I mean? I would have clocked my grounds would have gone up a lot more, you know what I mean? So
there was some. I mean, obviously we talk about the relegations to League 3, League 1 as it is now as such, but there was the triumph for coming back up, so there was a little bit of success in there. But yeah, I mean, apart from the Billy Davis spells where he got us near to the playoffs and then it imploded, really. Well, I think there was an interesting thing, Paul, and I don't know if you know this, but we were travelling down to Wembley and somebody asked a question. They said, did you know there was only a handful of teams? I think it was, I can't remember the exact number, 8 or 9 teams that had ever been to New Wembley.
Yeah.
And I didn't realise, and I clicked and I thought, yeah, we've never been to New Wembley. And Forest were one of only about 8 or 9 teams out of the 92 or so.
That's right.
That had never been to New Wembley because they've been starved of success for that many years.
So it was a good quiz question because nobody ever would guess Nottingham Forest never been to New Wembley. It was a trick question.
And all the other clubs had been through playoffs, through Johnson Paint Trophy, various other competitions. What's your memories, Paul, of the... obviously with your personal situation, you mentioned that the fact that you imploded personally in the sort of during the period we discussed earlier. What about you into the next decade? Where were you coming from there? Did you get back involved? Did you follow from a distance? Where were you coming from during the Billy Davis? That was the next probably prominent area after the Paul. We mentioned the Paul Hart, Billy Davis. What's your thoughts?
Well, Gary mentioned the year 2004. In that year, I'd have been 44 because I was born in 1960. I think that was around my mid-40s when I can remember or becoming very aware of, we talk about the game of football. I think the thing that I've become very aware of in my own sort of journey, if you like, is the game of life. And that was in that kind of period of the mid-90s. Where I was really beginning to understand the pattern and what was going off in my world. I couldn't control it. I was struggling to control it. So, rather than understanding the game of football, I was understanding the game of life more. And that was critical to me because in terms of the demons that had been attacking me since childhood, as I referred to them, I was starting to just get on top. But it was like, in football terms, I'd go 5-0 up. But I'd end up losing the game 6-5. And that was the story of my life because I'd still got them deep-rooted psychological... I hated myself because I was told as a kid what a waste of space I was. I'd never been loved, by the beast and all this kind of stuff. And this is why, a lot of the work I do now, particularly with young people, is around, putting that arm around the shoulder and just reassuring them how important they are. And no matter what anybody says to you, don't let them rubbish you. Don't. Because at the end of the day, if you imagine somebody wants to give you a red hot poker and put it in your hand, that's them trying to give you that. So by definition, it makes it theirs. What I say that anybody now that, tries to impart any badness or negative energy to me or my loved ones or my close pals, do you know what? That's yours. You're trying to give it to us. You take it back because we choose not to have it. So a lot of my psychological stuff, I started my foundation year for uni. I started my academic journey, Mick, in 91. I went to People's College. I'd lost a good job through my drinking because my drinking, I thought I'd got it under control. And then just when I wasn't, it was least at bang, I'd gone on a mad one and I'd sabotage everything. I'd deliberately sabotage it. I'd get myself in a fight, create havoc. Because it's interesting what you're saying, Gary, about leaving the sort of football scene and leaving the violence behind. Mine never left me because I was a loner. I kind of took it everywhere with me.
Yeah, I can understand that. Yeah.
We move on to the back end and in terms of the football, and we could talk again. Referring to the decade we're in now, going into 2023 next year, and the fantastic success which we'll touch on in a minute with Stevie Cooper. But both of you, any thoughts on in this decade on fashion and on music in particular? Is it anything lately that's come out and hit you in the face, Gary, music wise and fashion wise?
I'll be honest, years? Not really. Yeah, but we got into the 2000s music. Nothing really hit me really. It was all pop music and girl bands and boy bands, wasn't it? I never really got into that. It didn't do a lot for me. With the fashion, it's sort of like the casual era sort of it died a death sort of 90s, I think, and then saw everyone's wearing the same clothes in 2000s, so everyone looked the same. You know what I mean? You know, nobody stood out really. Everyone was wearing the same sort of clothing. You know, and then it was all boy and girl bands, wasn't it? And it didn't do a lot for me.
Nothing that tickled your fancy. What about you, Paul? Anything music-wise in the last few years that you can relate to? That you mentioned earlier about you always used to hark back to players' music. Has that changed in any way over the last few years with things?
No, not really, Mick. In fact, if anything, I think what's happened over the last few years, I've just become more aware, more appreciative of how privileged we are to play in the game of life. No matter what we've been through, it's such a gift and such an honour. And I tell you what, I've been through the mill, as you know. I am so grateful for those experiences. Yes, they were hard, 2 suicide attempts, no end of broken relationships, tears, heartache, blah, 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 and all the sob story that goes with that. But you know what, looking back. But it's interesting, Mick, to answer your question, I still revert back to, my dress sense. I don't dress like a young kid. Mind you, some would say, well, you shouldn't be, Paul, because she's 62 years of age. So maybe I shouldn't be dressing like her. But I suppose the nearest I went is like, and you've seen these because I've been to a couple of functions with you recently, was when I bought them patent Doc Marten shoes.
You sometimes, I never know what you're going to be dressed in. You sometimes the smartest man in the room, particularly with your white suits, but on another day, you can turn up with your shorts on and your bum bag, and I never know what to expect with you, Paul, to be fair.
Yeah. And I tell you what, that really speaks to the 6 human needs, because I've spoke about playing in the game of life and this need for certainty, clinging to music like the good old days, the great players of the 70s, etc. It's, the blast from the past, nostalgia, it's all certainty. But I think when you've got that in place, then you can go to the other extreme, which is like when you look at the 6 human needs. The first need is certainty. The second need is uncertainty. The third need is the need for significance and need to matter. The fourth need is the need for love and connection. The fifth one is the need for growth. And the final, the biggest human need that we all have, every single human being, is the need for contribution. And I look at that model, and boy, have I tested that model over the years. And it holds water. Gary, the stuff that you and I are doing now, and Mick does as well, contributing to others, that highest human need, it makes people tick, no matter what you've been through, what level you've played at in the game of life. If you've got that need for contribution, in my book, you're a top player.
I think that I get a lot of, I've always taken my role here at Carlton Town, where I've obviously been chairman for the last 20 or so years. And obviously there's a responsibility to the team and to the supporters. But I think one thing I've tried to do alongside you, particularly Paul in the early days and still now, but also when Gary's come on board, and it has been the community aspect of it, the work we do for charities and the work we do for the community. And even at the board meeting the other night, it was one of the things that came up is cost of living crisis. What we're going to do for the people that are struggling at Christmas, and another food bank was announced. And I'm sure we'll do something for Ukraine again next year without a shadow of doubt. So I personally, I've always thought that that gives me a lot of pride inside myself. The fact that you're doing something as well. Yes, you want your own football team to be successful, but I think it's nice to be given.
Yeah, you're a giver. Yeah. You're all givers. I think everyone in this room is givers. I mean, Oakfield, the company I work for, they're doing a Christmas donation. And Mick's already volunteered to donate clothes and kids' toys to kids in the city of Nottingham, helping out within the city of Nottingham straight away. Mick and Stell straight there. I sent them an email. It's come from our company. It's helping out the Nottingham School of Boxing in the city for Christmas. Mick's one of the first there straight away. But I totally agree. Everyone in this room at the moment are all givers. They don't think about themselves first; they think about other people,
which is a nice thing to do. And like you say, from your point of view, Paul, a lot of that is about the person you are, but also, as you said, about experiences you've had. And at the end of the day, it makes you the person you are. I just want to come to the back end of this, guys, if that's okay. By just touching on we've mentioned some great years under Brian Clough at Forest, and when all said and done, we're all Forest fans. I think it'd be amiss not to discuss the last 12 months under Steve Cooper. And I just want to touch on something from my point of view, which I just want to get your opinion on, both of you. The fantastic thing for me, apart from the fact that it took us from the bottom of the league to promotion, the two or three little things that stand out for me, and then I want to get your thoughts on what stand out for you. The first thing was to hear my little boy, I say my little boy, he's 18 now, when he went to Wembley, I took my daughter alongside me, she sat with me, which was lovely. But when my son said to me, Dad, that's the best day of my life, and I thought, I said, wow. And he said, you've been to European Cup finals, you've been to see him win things in the past. You took me to Forest as a kid. Yeah. I've been going there for 10 years. I've never seen anything. All it's been is misery, really. And he said that was the greatest day of his life, and it hit me. It hit me. And I mean, I've took him to a couple of away games this season where we got stuffed, and he's hated it. He's loved the day, but he's hated the, and the thing that sticks out for me this season, and I'll finish with my view on this, was the fact that Forest have struggled a bit at the start of this season, and we know some of the reasons for that are the jump up in class, the fact they had to bring so many players in and getting all that together. But after the Leicester game, which was on the telly, they were 4-0 down, and the fans were still singing the manager's name. And I remember listening to TalkSport the next morning, and I remember Jim White and Simon Jordan were debating which manager would be first to get the sack, and they were asking for Forest fans to come on. And at the end of it all, they had 2 or 3 calls. Everybody was positive. And at the end of it, I remember Jim White saying, he said, Simon, he said, normally when we put something like this out, it's a split. He said, there are no Forest fans coming on this. There's no messages coming in asking for Cooper to go. They're bottom of the league. He said, and every single fan, he said, it's incredible, every fan. And that's how we feel. That's how, I talk to customers. I've got the shop near the ground, and I don't think I've had a conversation with anybody that wants Cooper to go. They fell in love with the guy. Yeah. Now, whether that will last forever, who knows? That might change if we carry on struggling or whatever. But they gave him the new contract, and things are going in the right direction again. Right. It's going to be a slow battle. What's your thoughts on the promotion and what I've just said?
I totally agree with you. What Mick just said. I took my boy to Wembley. Obviously, he's 12. I've seen him tickets since he was 4. He's never seen Forest. All he's seen is Forest struggle. Never seen him do anything. And then last season, when Cooper was bottom of the league, it was always a struggle, wasn't it? And my boy's never seen anything, no success whatsoever. I know he's a bit younger than Mick's boy, but and take him to Wembley and see the joy when we won at the final whistle. He was crying with joy, and I've got it on video. And even Johnny Owen says he sent it to Marinakis, the owner. He said that's my favourite video of the day. My boy crying with joy, and he actually sent it to the Greek owners. And personally showed it them. I thought, I was just so made up for my lad. You know what I mean? And that was better than me going to see Forest win the League Cup in the 70s, see Forest win European Cups, see Forest second great team. That gave me more joy that watching my boy win at Wembley. That was probably one of the best moments in football I've ever had. The feeling, the emotion, watching my lad see Forest get promotion in Wembley. And that was my greatest football day in football.
I got my daughter with me. We went back on the coach, and I regretted that because I would have liked to have met up with my lad after the game and had a beer with him and stayed in London, and that was my only regret. That I'd sort of come back, if you like. What about you? What about yourself, Paul? Because I know you were there as well.
You're always with me. Paul was with me, wasn't you? We celebrated after, didn't we, Paul?
Just a bit. He says
you had a glass of water. You had a glass of water. I had about 15 pints of Guinness for you.
I think I had about 30 pints of water. Talk about flushing yourself out. I mean, for me, I kind of want to take about. There's a whole emotional pack to unpack here. You look at Steve Cooper. The man is such a genuine, loving, caring character with very, very high values. That's why he stands the test of time. That's why the supporters are there, because they realise people are not stupid. You see, modern day business, to me, people, they make big mistakes because they think people are stupid. We're not. And when they see people that are humble, are genuine, are vulnerable, and they are some of the labels, and I don't work in labels, but the attributes that I would, associate with Steve Cooper, And Gary, we went to, as you did, Mick, the three of us recently went to Merthyr Town, and the humility and the warmth and the love and the strength of those people, they capture your hearts. And that's what Stevie Cooper's done with people. It's not necessarily a football thing. He's actually saying to the world, you know what, I'm here. This is my art. You can have it if you want. And we as human beings, irrespective of what bloody football club you belong to, first and foremost, we're human beings. Or Bill Shankly might have another take upon that.
Paul, I totally agree with you. I listened to a post-match interview after the Palace win on Saturday with Stevie Cooper, and honestly, the words, he comes up, everything. I have goosebumps. I've been listening to him, because we've been struggling, and he lost his job, didn't he? And the man is proper, he's Forest through and through, he's genuine, and the way he talks, and that win over Palace, I think it's the first time he's done his fist pump for a long time. That's come back, and the feel-good factor's there. And the fans have never stopped loving him, have they? No. The old club. I think it was a fans campaign that kept him.
I agree.
Kept him on board. Really, I think the Greeks were on the verge of getting rid of him.
I think there was a lot of rumours about Benitez, which I think would have been toxic for the club, and I think it would have gone the other way. And I also, I was at the Brighton game where we were hanging on for the whole game, Paul.
That was a bit of a turning point. We didn't play very well. We're all there. We didn't play very well.
Standing ovation, Cooper got at the end.
And they come over to the fans. We took 3,500 on a Tuesday night, didn't we? To Brighton. So you could tell the fans are totally, honestly, utterly behind him, aren't they? It'd have been a travesty if we'd have got rid of him. But obviously, I think the owners listen to the fans, and it's fantastic. I think we turned the corner now. I think we'll be all right. Don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, but I think you don't just become a bad manager overnight. And like Mick says, he's had all these players slung at him. He's had to make another team, and he's slowly turning it round. And I think we'll be all right.
Yeah.
Mick,
it gives me goosebumps.
I had that conversation with.
I get goosebumps.
Yeah. I had that conversation with you both of you separately after the Brighton game, and and I agree with the terminology. We turned it. You look at that season turned on that game. But I tell you what, for me, because we talk about, for me, I'm talking about not the game of football. I'm talking about the game of life now. And you look at the Stevie Coopers of this world, he will be a champion wherever he goes. As Cloughy used to say, do you know what? If we decide to play dominoes, we'll be the bloody best in the game. And that's what Stevie Cooper is, because he's such a genuine, humble, loving man. It's as simple as that. And I said to both of you guys, Forest will not get relegated. I will put my house on it. I haven't got one, but if I had one, I'd put my house on it. I would, honestly, because I just see underneath, the world has become very superficial, very fickle. All this social media, blah, blah, blah. But this is what I love about certainly my own journey in the game of life, and appreciating those hard lessons, to look below the surface, look into the whites of a man's eyes, and see the fear when he's got all that bravado. Gary, you'll relate to this from your kind of, your younger days where you didn't lose face, or you couldn't lose face, or you couldn't blink. You had to get in first. That body language, if you like. And when you look into a man's eyes, you see his soul. And although he might be giving it the big one, you can see he's ready to cry. And I think that's what the game of life's taught me. So I just want to answer your question, Mick, around the lead up to Stevie Cooper. There were 4 games, and this is where I thank Gary immensely. The first one was Peterborough. That was the first time I'd been to an away game since we went to Peterborough when we got promotion that year. When we won 3-2. They were 2-0 down after 7 minutes. Ken Charlery scored 2 goals, and they won 3-2. I think Stuart Pearce banged one in on half time.
I was there.
I was there.
You weren't at the game there, wasn't you?
I was in the city centre. Yeah. I wasn't allowed in the game. But I did actually pop my head at the final whistle in the Peterborough end.
Very nice of you.
Nobody could see me.
And then on the back of that one, and this was bizarre, as you know, Gary, I went to the Hull City game away, and that was a strange year. And then we got the 2 Sheffield legs, and the rest is history. For me, the game I will never, ever, and this is where I massively agree with you, Gary, around what you've said, around your son exchanging all those wins, all those glory years and blah, blah, blah. For me, Mick, and I stood shoulder to shoulder with you that day at Wembley, as you know. And for me, that game will never, ever, ever leave me. And that wasn't about Forest getting promotion, by the way. It was the atmosphere. There was a different energy on the terraces, the like of what I had never, ever experienced in my life. And for that,
I totally agree with what Mick said in the first place. Having your son with you and seeing his son watch that success for the first time.
My son was in the stadium.
Being surrounded by your family at such a special day, special event. Like me, I think it's probably the best day I've ever had in football.
It hit me when I watched it back. When I watched it back, I sat down a few days later and I watched it back, and that when I remember the atmosphere, but having sat down and watched Stuart Pearce was on the pitch and the whole thing after that, that's where it really hit me. I think 3 or 4 days later when I watched it back, it was.
Still gave me goosebumps. I had tears in my eyes. Still having tears in my eyes. For days later, it still gives me goosebumps. Now, listen, Free From Desire, the old ground bouncing. Unbelievable atmosphere. I've never seen an atmosphere like it. To be honest, in football, everywhere I've been in the world watching football, I've never witnessed an atmosphere like it.
A lot of people have said that.
Never. And I followed it football around the world for years and years. That's the best I've ever seen.
And I tell you what, there's an old saying in the game of life. People will never remember you for your words. They'll remember you for how you made them feel. Stevie Cooper made Nottingham feel beyond special that day. That's why he's still at Nottingham Forest. And that's why he will go from success to success to success. Because I'll say it again, he's such a humble guy and he knows how to genuinely make people feel special. That's why they love him. Not because he's a great football manager.
No.
I think we're all on the same page with that one.
I've met him a couple of times. He's a lovely man. I know people that know him personally, and everyone speaks so highly of him. You know, he hasn't got a bad word against anybody. He's just a lovely human being. And like you say, Paul, he's going to go on to great things, whether it's with Nottingham Forest or not with Nottingham Forest. I hope it is not with Nottingham Forest. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I might even consider asking him to be my best man one day if we ever get married. And on that humorous note, probably a good place to. I can feel the referee putting the whistle in his mouth now to say, guys, come on, we're in extra time. So probably if I can turn the tables here, Mick, you've been a brilliant question master. You've done this before, we know, just 1 or 2 times. And just ask you both really for under the banner of music, under the banner of memorable matches, just to sum up in, 1 sentence apiece. Your number one, how you'd sum it up in, maybe 1 minute a piece.
From a personal point of view, like I say, the music for me was the 80s. That was the era that I still look back to. Memories, going to the European Cup final in 1979 with my best mate Greg and his dad. That stands out. That's something I'll never do again. And just to finish, really, was like Boatsy said, the fact I was at that cup final with my daughter by my side and my son also in the ground. 2 different eras, 2 different special places, but certainly in terms of the football, they were probably the 2 most special days. And the music, like I say, 80s for me.
Gary?
Memories stick out. Football, my first Forest game ever, Forest v Norwich City, 1974. Even though we lost that day, I got the bug. My dad bought me a rosette, Forest rosette, and a Norwich rosette, and it's 25 pence to get in. Standing on the cop at the Bridgeford end, and then going to the League Cup final, seeing Forest win the League Cup at Old Trafford when John O'Hare was inside the box, and seeing Robbo get that penalty, going with my mum and dad, a couple of mates. That night game at Old Trafford, that was fantastic, seeing Forest win the League Cup. Music-wise, I totally agree with Mick. 80s, coming out of school, Human League, all that sort of music. I was becoming casual as well with a wedge haircut, wearing all them sort of clothes. I love Brian Ferry as well. That's music as well. Like Brian Ferry was one of my favourite bands as well. Yeah, like Roxy music. And then 90s, it was like I loved Oasis, and probably the greatest ever day in football was seeing Forest get promotion after all these years at Wembley with my son. And it still gives me goosebumps to this day.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And mine, just to bring this to a close, listeners, which, from a personal point of view, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Mick, thank you so much. Gary, as ever. But I want to close this out by nostalgia, because I still live in this world of appreciating good, honest, solid players in life, people. Stevie Cooper, in my humble opinion, is massively one of those. So that, and I think we were all agreed the memorable match was May the 29th, 2022, Wembley. Nottingham Forest 1, Huddersfield 0. Promoted to the Premier League. The music that goes with that is one of Stevie Cooper's fellow country people, Dame Shirley Bassey. And it's been to back the 70s, may even been the late 60s, when she sang that iconic song, This Is My Life. And I don't give a damn for lost emotions. I've such a lot of love I want to give. Let me live. And to me, that really symbolises my own life. It symbolises everything we've spoke about. It symbolises the contribution that we make to people. And it's just been such a roller coaster ride, as it has for Stevie and Forest in his early days back in the Premier League. But so Dame Shirley Bassey on singing. I'd love to sing with her at a cup final one day when Forest playing the FA Cup final. That's on my bucket list.
We'll be back.
There you have it, listeners. So the ref has blown his whistle. So Gary, Mick and myself, we've got to go off the pitch now, whether we want to or not, as much as we enjoy the game of life. And I'm going to close out now, listeners, the way I always do, by saying, remember, the game's changing. How will you respond?
Thanks very much for listening to this World Game Changers podcast episode. Hopefully you found it interesting and helpful. Drop a line to Paul at worldgamechangers.org with any thoughts or questions you may have, and he'll be more than happy to respond. Remember, the world's changing. How will you respond?